Our weather is changing rapidly, and it's resulting in more mega natural disasters. Giant storms, droughts, floods, the list goes on. On the 26th of July 2005, a month before Hurricane Katrina ripped through New Orleans, Mumbai, India's financial capital, with a population of 18.3 million, received its highest rainfall in recorded history. An incredible 944 millimeters of rain fell on the city in 24 hours. The resulting flood left hundreds dead. This is the story of that terrible day and the flood that brought the world's fifth largest city to a grinding halt. 26th of July 2005 began like any other monsoon day in Mumbai. It was a dull, cloudy day that gave no forewarning of the disaster that was to come. Most people reported to work on time, blissfully unaware that their will to survive and tenacity would soon be put to the ultimate test. Many would not make it home alive. In an orphanage in an eastern Mumbai suburb, almost 100 young children between the ages of 3 and 12 went about their regular routine. Meanwhile, in a center run by the Spastic Society in a central Mumbai suburb, two physically challenged students, Ajay and Namita, begin their daily class. They'd been driven to the center in a hired three-wheeled taxi driven by Dinka Veer. He would come back for them later in the day. Unknown to any of them, an unprecedented giant stationary cloud was building rapidly over the northern suburbs of Mumbai. Eventually, this cloud would burst, and Mumbai would record its highest rainfall ever. "944 millimeters of rain in 24 hours. That's about 20 times more than the city usually receives on a regular monsoon day. By the time it would finish, millions would be marooned, and over 1,000 people would lose their lives. The memories of those terrible days are still fresh in the minds of Mumbai's citizens who survived the ordeal.
I'd gone out for some work that day, and suddenly water started gushing in. I was held up in the same area for 2 days. I couldn't go back home.
There was a rising water level. The buses were stranded and cars were literally, mind you, they were floating in the water. So it was total chaos. It was total shock.
The water was up to waist height over here, same place. It had all blocked down. So after that I decided to walk all the way. As we went on more and more, it got cold, the water started freezing.
But at 1 p.m. on that fateful day, when the rain had begun to fall, there was very little indication of the looming disaster. The Indian Meteorological Department in Mumbai that monitors cloud formations wasn't unduly concerned about the clouds that were starting to show up on their radars. But by 2:30 p.m., officials at the Met Department realized that something was terribly wrong. The cloud had grown in intensity and size. From the radars, officials could tell the cloud was at least 15 kilometers high and spread over 30 kilometers of Mumbai's northern suburbs. The Deputy Director General of Met, Thakur Prasad, decides it's time to issue a weather warning.
Normally cloud heights of 6 to 8 kilometers only are seen in general during monsoon season. But this was something unusual.
At first, it seemed like a regular monsoon downpour to Mumbai's tenacious citizens. At the orphanage, the rain drove the children indoors.
On the 26th of July, when the rain came, we shifted the children to a classroom and switched on the television to keep the children entertained.
At the vocational center, Dinka Veer had picked up Ajay and Namita, two physically challenged students, when they were done for the day. Even though it had started to rain, Dinka decided it was best to get them home to their parents and to wait for the rain to stop.
It was just like any other rainy day. I had no idea that the water level will rise to such an extent.
23-year-old Habib Miti Borwala, a television actor, had been caught in a traffic snarl. Pretty usual in Mumbai on most days. Habib decided to sit it out and wait for the traffic to start moving again. By 3:30 p.m., Mumbai was in trouble. The incessant heavy rain had caused massive flooding in most of the suburbs. The man-made stormwater drains had shut under the force of the incoming tide. The ancient open sewers and drains around the city had turned into raging rivulets and were fast becoming death traps for the city's unsuspecting citizens. The Miti River, one of the 6 rivers that have their estuaries around Mumbai and its suburbs, had started to overflow its banks. The city was starting to grind to a halt. Meanwhile, Rachna Sawant and her husband Sanjay and Rachna's father-in-law were struggling through the rising floodwaters to get to a hospital. Rachna's labor pains had started and she was in need of urgent medical attention.
The area where we stayed was on a slope. The water force made it difficult to move ahead. The water had reached our knees.
Rachna and Sanjay were on their own, battling nature at its worst. Would they make it to a hospital in time? Would Rachna's still-to-be-born baby survive this ordeal? Heavy rains had been lashing India's financial capital, Mumbai, for over 3 hours. The rain was being caused by a massive cloud spread over 30 square kilometers and over 15 kilometers high, and showed no sign of letting up. The rivers had started to flood, and the open stormwater drains were overflowing. Rachna and Sanjay have been struggling in the floodwaters to get to a hospital. But in the flood, the going was slow and no help was in sight.
The floodwater looked like a river was overflowing. The water had collected everywhere.
In the orphanage, the floodwaters had entered the hall the children had taken shelter in when the rain first began. The children clamber onto the windowsills to escape the rising floodwaters.
Within a matter of 30 minutes, the water level rose dramatically. At that time, there was at least 4.5 feet of water.
Meanwhile, Dinka Veer struggled to get his two physically challenged passengers, Namita and Ajay, to safety. Passers-by stopped to help get his vehicle and its passengers onto higher ground.
Somehow I parked at an elevated area, but the water level kept rising. I was worried that if the water level continued rising like this, my auto will soon be underwater.
Meanwhile, with floodwaters rising all around him, actor Habib was still trapped in the traffic snarl. His father, who he spoke to on his phone, urged him to abandon his car and make for safer ground. But Habib decided to wait in the car, convinced that traffic will soon move again. It's the last call he would make that day. In the car, with nowhere to go, he turned on the air conditioning system to make his wait more comfortable. Even as Habib waited for the traffic to start moving again, Mumbai had now ground to a halt. The Methi River that runs adjacent to the Mumbai International Airport had flooded, submerging the runways and forcing the authorities to shut down India's busiest airport.
Towards the evening, we had the water flowing inside from operation area to the city side. And we also noticed that there are breaches in the operational wall. The Methi River water came in. When I took the first round, I found that a lot of drums were on the runway. A lot of other material came inside the operation area through the water.
With Mumbai's airport rendered useless, hundreds of passengers are now marooned in the airport, with floodwaters raging all around.
My flight was at 2. It got delayed by an hour. After it started raining so heavily, I had to spend the night at the airport.
With the highways leading out of town already submerged and rail links gone too, Mumbai is now cut off from the rest of India, and her citizens left to fight for themselves. While the rain continued to pour down, the local government couldn't get its choppers into the air to assess the damage. And with the roads clogged with stalled cars and buses, emergency vehicles too couldn't make much headway. Now news of the first casualties start coming in. In northern Mumbai, the rain has brought down an entire hillside, and with it, 100 or more makeshift huts, part of a slum that had been built on top of the hill. But the roads are flooded and clogged with broken down vehicles, making it difficult for emergency workers and machinery to get to the site of the disaster. Hundreds are feared trapped inside the rubble. But there's very little anyone can do till the floodwaters subside. But Rachna's troubles were still far from over. Sanjay manages to convince a three-wheel taxi to take her to another hospital. But they don't have doctors on hand either.
There was not a single patient, and there was no electricity. There was just one nurse and no doctor at that time.
Back at the orphanage, the flood showed no sign of abating. To keep their morale up, the children start singing a popular hymn.
I saw the children were crying. They are about to drown. The water level had reached the cot. We had to put some children on the cot and on the cupboards. Some girls stood holding the grill on the windowsill. I thought, what will I do now?
Help did come, but from an unexpected quarter. One of the older children, a girl named Asma, decided that she was going to try and get the children to safety. She and one of the teachers plunged into the swelling floodwaters, each carrying children on their backs in an attempt to get to higher ground.
Asma saw that the situation was serious. The children needed to be saved. Unmindful of her safety, she jumped into the water and said, "Give me the children." Carrying 2 children at a time, they managed to safely evacuate all of them to another building.
Across the town, things are not going well for Rachna and Sanjay. Though they've managed to get to a hospital, no help is in sight, as the hospital has been abandoned and the patients moved out.
I could not bear the pain, so I told them to do a cesarean. But to handle the emergency, they didn't have a doctor. The nurses were trying to call the doctor but couldn't reach her. Her mobile was not reachable. Then, 2 nurses went to her house to call her.
Some distance away, Dinka Veer faced a critical dilemma as his physically challenged passengers had little ability to communicate. They hadn't eaten for several hours. He could either stay with them or step out in search of food.
I could understand that the children were handicapped, but what could I do? There was no help available. I was forced to leave them. I had no option. The children had never stayed away from their parents, and on that day they had begun to cry. They were scared and were constantly saying, "We want to go home."
Wading through the raging waters, Dinka struggled to find food for Ajay and Namita. A few kilometers away, Namita's mother was extremely apprehensive about her daughter's safety.
It was raining continuously. The water was coming inside. I was thinking about Namita, where she would be. Thinking of her made me cry.
As daylight begins to fade, the citizens of Mumbai are desperate to get home to safety and to find their loved ones. But with public transport rendered useless and roads jammed with stalled cars, their options are limited. They must either stay where they are or risk walking miles through the flooded streets to get home. Thousands chose the latter. Many amongst them didn't make it home alive. At the railway stations, the airport, in offices, buses, cars, and even their own homes, millions of Mumbaikars were marooned. On one of Mumbai's flooded streets, Habib was trapped in his car. His decision to switch on his car's air conditioner had caused the reverse fumes of the engine to enter the cabin, causing him to lose consciousness. Meanwhile, the electricity supply company decided to cut the power supply to most of Mumbai's flooded areas to prevent people from getting electrocuted. As the city powered down, the entire financial backbone of India blinked off. The stock exchange, banks, and even ATMs were turned off.
In 2 days, the markets were not functioning, and when you're trying to project Mumbai as a global financial center, then you can't afford to have your major exchanges shutting down even for a couple of hours. Every day, billions of dollars worth of transactions take place, and so if 2 days transactions have not taken place, that would be the amount of loss of business.
As night fell over the city, an eerie silence descended over Mumbai. Hundreds were dead or missing. In homes across the city, millions of families sat up through the night, maintaining a vigil, hoping and praying that their loved ones would soon return.
From 6 o'clock, अभी तक मैं फंसा ही हूँ. मैं पैदल आ रहा हूँ और देख रहा हूँ रोड पे हजारों लोग पैदल चल रहे हैं. And traffic is stuck up, water is stuck up like anything.
At Radio City, one of Mumbai's popular local radio stations, Anirudh, a presenter, was one of the many people stranded in their offices.
Fortunately, this building was one of the only buildings where there was light, so that was really nice. And then by around 11:30, I got this idea that we're not really doing anything. We realized that why don't we actually do something for the people, because we were getting a lot of phone calls, and I decided to come on air.
For the next 9 hours, Anirudh would keep the station going, providing stranded commuters with some relief and giving them information about how the city was coping.
8 to 9 hours I was on air directly, live, like continuously from 11:30 at night to around 8:30 in the morning, so around 9 hours. And it was the most incredible moments of my life, because we were all like islands stuck separately. None of us knew where the other was.
That night, Anirudh answered hundreds of phone calls from people tormented by the raging waters, reassuring them that they weren't alone and that help would soon be on hand.
There's this one girl who was stuck at home. She had no clue where her parents were, and she was really scared. And when she heard my reassuring voice, even though we were so miles away from each other, we felt really nice.
People were stuck in floods and walking home, and we knew it was drastic by then. They didn't have any communication. Radio does become a friendly voice. It becomes like a friend that you have to keep you company, so you know that you're not alone and lost.
In fact, the night of the disaster brought out the best in Mumbaikars. With nowhere to go and with no help available from the authorities, the citizens of Mumbai turned to help each other. Out in the streets, they formed groups offering stranded commuters food and drinking water. In fact, that night, homes were open to complete strangers who were welcomed and offered shelter from the raging flood.
Times like this that you really realize that people in your building are not just people whom you know, but people who really care for you and really can help for you.
But even as its citizens banded together to help each other, Mumbai had surrendered to the floodwaters. The city that never sleeps had finally ground to a complete halt. On the 26th of July 2005, Mumbai, the world's 5th largest city, home to 18.3 million people, was brought to its knees. 944 millimeters of rainfall fell in 24 hours, flooding the city, stranding its citizens and devastating its economy for several days. Mumbaikars used to say that life and work never stopped in their city, no matter what the circumstance. But on the 26th of July 2005, Mumbai ground to a complete halt. Hundreds were killed, and civic infrastructure in the flooded suburbs collapsed completely. Why did this happen? That's a question that experts and the administration have been grappling with since that fateful day. It all began on the morning of the 26th, when an intense low-pressure area developed over Mumbai, resulting in a massive buildup of clouds. Normally, monsoon clouds rise to a height of 6 to 8 kilometers. But on this day, a massive 15-kilometer high cloud that spread over 30 square kilometers built rapidly. When this cloud burst, the northern suburbs of the city were submerged. Dr. Jayanti of the Indian Meteorological Department believes that even with the cloud visible on their radars, they had no way of predicting the intensity of rainfall.
What we give is, we have different categories. Intensity wise, we give rainfall, heavy rainfall, very heavy rainfall. Very heavy rainfall, the upper ceiling is not given. That is the main problem. That is, heavy rainfall is anything, it could be anything more than 13 centimeters. It is not possible with the existing state of art to predict the quantity of rainfall.
Precaution that should have been taken was to provide information that day. And I think many lives were lost. People had needless kind of dislocation. So all you need to do is to put out a word, was to tell people, whether they're in offices or schools, not to leave. Stay where you are.
The Met did give out a very heavy rainfall warning at 2:30 in the afternoon, but by then it was too little, too late. As a coastal city, Mumbai has been subjected to very heavy rainfall in the past, and the city had a system of defences in place to deal with the heavy rain that is expected each year, especially during the monsoons. The most important of these are the wetlands and the Methi River, which acts as the city's biggest stormwater drain. The river, along with its man-made network of drains that span for about 2,000 kilometers, are supposed to help keep the city from flooding in case of exceptionally high rainfall. In 1990, Watson and Hawksley, two engineers from the United Kingdom, had conducted a survey of Mumbai's 150-year-old drainage network and had recommended a design in accordance to the city's requirements. This drainage system was designed to handle up to 50 millimeters of rainfall. Their study was based on the average rainfall, the existing drainage system, and the city's wetlands. Since then, ground realities have undergone a sea change. Mumbai has expanded exponentially, but in an unplanned way, and that has affected the city's ability to combat natural disasters.
But in those days, there was sufficient green areas to absorb that kind of rainfall and allow the excess to flow into the sea through the rivers, through the creeks, through the mangroves, through all the natural systems. All those have been destroyed. So there's nothing to fall back on.
Environmentalist Bittu Sehgal believes that Mumbai's natural drainage facilities have been clogged by the city's relentless pursuit of urbanization.
When the 900 millimeter rain fell, there was no escape for the water. This would happen in your living room. If you plugged the sink in your bathroom and left the taps on overnight and went on a holiday, you'd come back, you'd have your house under 3 feet of water. That's what happened here.
Bittu Sehgal believes that man-made blockages to the natural flow of the Methi River was mainly responsible for the excessive flooding on July 26, 2005.
We blocked the mouth of the Methi River. We actually dammed it. We just took a lot of earth, we quarried land and earth, possibly from the national park, dumped it on it, destroyed the mouth of the river, and then left a little culvert so that the river could pass through. The end result was that while the rain fell as a normal rain, 200 millimeters, 300 millimeters, there was always a little flooding. But when it came to 900 plus, the river told us what the river would do to us if we disrespected it. People died.
In 2002, a controversial multi-million-dollar project, the Bandra-Worli Sea Bridge, was constructed, linking the northern and southern parts of Mumbai. Its construction is said to have constricted the mouth of the Methi River, leaving the water with no escape route to the sea.
So you've narrowed the mouth of the river, you've reclaimed land. So if there's a high tide and it surges, as it does every day, and suppose there's a big deluge at that time, it will not be able to drain out normally because you've narrowed the exit. So it will then swell and flood.
We had anticipated this. In fact, I was on the committee that suggested to them that this is a bad idea. We suggested that instead of doing these flyovers first, let's have public transport, let's have these footpaths, let's do this. As is the way of the world, we were ignored. Even now, I don't see the learnings. I read the newspapers, committees after committees, all designed to see that the commercial investments are still protected. But the river, is the river protected? No.
For years, environmentalists like Bitu Sehgal and Daryl De Monte have been trying to get the administration to stop the unnatural blocking of the Methi River, but to no avail.
There's been completely reckless construction with no thought to drainage. The Methi River was treated as some kind of filthy drain, not a proper river. So there have been a series of developments, beginning with the airport itself. At the airport, the Methi River has been bent. So that is why the airport, as you know, on the 26th, 27th of July in 2005, had 1 or 2 feet of water. I think 1,200 flights were cancelled.
But it wasn't just the Methi River overflowing its banks that caused the flooding in the city. Actually, Mumbai was never supposed to be what it is today. Historically, Mumbai was a group of 7 islands that were connected by boats and bridges. Then, in 1817, the British started reclaiming land from the sea to expand the city and make it into a single amalgamated mass. Amazingly, about 65% of Mumbai is reclaimed from the sea and surrounding creeks. And human efforts to reshape nature haven't stopped. According to Chandrasekhar Prabhu, an expert in urban management, the excessive concretization of the city also contributed in large measure to the disaster.
Every single skyscraper which has come has resulted in that entire land being concretized, stopping the natural rainwater from seeping into the ground, and so the pressure on the stormwater increased. So it is not that the stormwater drain can't take that kind of pressure. It is that you have put double pressure. The rain has not doubled, but the pressure on the stormwater has doubled because that land which was supposed to take away the water, which was an alternate system of drainage where water went underground, is now not available. So it is a man-made tragedy.
It's not just Mumbai's land and the Methi River that have borne the brunt of excessive urbanization. Mumbai's wetlands, the city's mangrove forests, an incredibly effective defense system against surging waters have been systematically destroyed over the years.
Mangroves are typically important in terms of floodplain control. Mangroves actually store this water for a short period and release it back to the sea, saving the entire city from a flash flood kind of a situation.
Those natural sponges have all been clogged up, so nature is going to hit back. So the flood is almost inevitable. This kind of ignorance, we call it ecological illiteracy.
A month after the deluge in Mumbai, Hurricane Katrina ripped through New Orleans, killing hundreds and destroying the city. New Orleans was just as vulnerable a city as Mumbai because of the millions of acres of coastal wetlands that it had lost. They would have served as buffers and prevented the surging waters that hurricanes push ashore. But there's no escaping the fact that even if Mumbai's defense systems against flooding had been fully activated, they would not have been able to deal with the 944 millimeters of rain that fell that day, which is about 20 times more than a regular monsoon day. One day after the rain first began to come down, entire colonies, roads, offices, shops and homes in Mumbai's northern suburbs are still submerged under several feet of water. With no help in sight from the administration, it was left to ordinary citizens to drive rescue efforts. Putting aside their personal tragedies, they set about doing whatever they could to help those in need. Amongst them was Police Inspector Tushar Kadam, whose daughter had been reported missing. When Tushar finally managed to escape from his apartment, he was stunned by what he saw.
It was pretty bad. There were dead bodies floating around. There were people hanging on compound walls, on treetops. There were people stuck up on BST buses on the top of the bus because water was about 14 feet high.
Though his daughter was still missing, Tushar got together a group of volunteers and went about rescuing those still trapped by the floodwaters.
We arranged for a boat from Mime Fisherman Colony. Because people told us that a boat has a hole in it, but nevertheless we said we could save some people.
Tushar and his group of volunteers were in the water for 16 hours, saving lives. In northwest Mumbai, the landslide that had brought down an entire hillside killed 75 people. Many more were trapped in the rubble.
We never imagined that we would be faced with such a situation. The areas which were inundated were completely cut off. We were struggling to deploy army and navy, but all the roads were completely blocked. The traffic came to a complete standstill.
When the relief workers finally did manage to reach the landslide's vicinity, they found the lanes were too narrow for the emergency vehicles. They were forced to demolish about 25 structures before they could reach those trapped in the rubble. Meanwhile, actor Habib had regained consciousness and had managed to force his way out of the car he was trapped in. But his stagnant weight in the same position for more than 11 hours had caused his legs to become paralyzed. He collapsed in the water, where he was found hours later by passers-by who took him to a hospital. Doctors declared him dead.
The doctor checked my pulse and all. So there was no pulse, there was nothing. So the doctor declared me dead. I have changed two hospitals. In the second hospital, like the doctors over there said that they had to cut my legs.
I couldn't digest that. I couldn't see myself without legs. And it was the most shocking thing for which I didn't have any answers. Somewhere in the mind, I knew that I am in a very dangerous situation. As a professional actor, I knew my career was ending.
On the 26th of July 2005, 944 millimeters of rainfall, about 20 times more than a regular monsoon day, took Mumbai by surprise. Over 1,000 people were killed in the deluge and the resulting flood. Dr. Anjali Chabria, a practicing psychiatrist, believes that the trauma caused by the deluge has made it difficult for many of Mumbai's citizens to return to their normal lives.
This was something that the city has never faced, and it's like, even though people are trying to appear brave, but we see every day I have people coming up to me and saying that I don't feel secure. Every time it starts raining, there is a sense of, oh my God, anxiety which goes up. And people call up each other, and then everybody wants to stay indoors.
For one of Dr. Chabria's patients, Chandra Bablani, the monsoons were once an integral part of her life in Mumbai and brought back many fond memories of years gone by. But all that has now changed.
Whenever it starts raining again, and this year as it has rained so heavily, I really get scared and I really get palpitation and I always have a fear that the same nightmare can come again, and I make sure that all my family members are at home. I mean, I don't let them go to college, I don't let my younger one go to school, even I tell my husband not to go out of the house.
Mumbai's losses seemed unquantifiable, both in terms of life and property. But the people of Mumbai, in a spirit that defines their city, soon picked up the pieces. But it wasn't easy, for the floodwaters had decimated large tracts of the city.
It was an extremely difficult task to organize relief on such a large scale. We were looking at close to 2 million people. We decided that we would requisition all the people from all over Mumbai and press them into the distribution of relief. We organized more than 200 teams to fan out to all the areas and distribute relief.
Mumbaikars stood together as one in an incredible demonstration of unity and brotherhood, helping each other to cope with the disaster. In some areas, the water did not recede for 3 to 4 days. Power was restored only after 3 days in some places, and in others only after a week. It took almost 2 days to get the local trains back in operation. In less than a week after the deluge, the city that never sleeps was once again awake and alive. Habib is happy to be back on his feet. His legs were saved, and after 11 months of treatment, he walked out cured. He's even started driving again.
I can drive a car. I've started playing what I like. I can play cricket now. And if sometimes I want, even I can dance on my own music numbers for 5-10 minutes. I've started doing things what I want in my life.
Dinka Veer managed to get Namita and Ajay home safely.
When I look back, Mumbai has incurred so much damage. So many people have lost their lives. I am happy that I could save at least 2 lives.
Asma was recommended for the President's Bravery Medal for her heroic efforts. She's now the star of her class.
My teacher has taught me to help others. If you do good for others, good things will happen to you.
Rachna Sawant gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She's named her Chaitanya. Tushar Kadam's efforts to rescue stranded people were highly appreciated. His missing daughter was eventually found and is back home safe.
My daughter came in front of me, she saluted me and she said, "I'm very proud of you, Papa." That was a gift to me, in fact.
And Anirudh still rides Mumbai's airwaves. After the deluge, the government put together a team of experts to examine the reason for Mumbai's flood. A package of over $600 million was also announced to revamp the city's drainage system and to clean the Methi River. But is it a case of too little done too late? Will man ever be able to conquer nature?